Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's presentation, which is going to look at assessment mitigation and the guidance available to you for VRQ, NVQs and other qualifications offered by City and Guilds. My name's Don Green and I'm joined today by Lead Industry Manager Mandy Slaney and Lead Assessment Manager Gary Cole. Mandy and Gary are going to support with the questions at the end of the presentation. I've also asked them to kindly jump in at any time should they be aware of any further changes or amendments as we go. We are going through unprecedented times, and since lockdown began in March, we have been working alongside other awarding organisations, awarding bodies, sector stakeholders and regulators to develop approaches to support as many learners as possible achieve a result this summer. You will probably have heard about mitigation, mostly through news of how GCSEs, A-levels, technicals, functional skills and other high volume qualifications will be treated, given that learners this summer will not be able to take their assessments in the way that they might have expected or planned to have done. In the following slides, we will talk through the approaches we've adopted for our qualifications and where you can find the guidance and support you need to help you through our processes. Once again, firstly, many thanks to all of you for joining today. I'm going to start with showing you the best way to keep in touch with up-to-date information, just basically before we move on to about how we can support you essentially. Obviously, the main bulk of the presentation will, of course, be about whether or not qualifications to calculate, adapt and delay, looking at those options given to the business skills portfolio. Before allowing time at the end for Q&A. Quite happy to take questions today. If you have a question, please feel free to type your question in the questions section on GoToWebinar. We've just got to remember we're going to receive lots and lots of questions regarding the many different qualifications within our business skills portfolio. And of course, many of those units do overlap with one another. There's obviously different routes available, etc. So with this in mind, can I ask first of all that when you start each question, you do actually type in the qualification number first, followed by your question. This will allow us then to give you the correct answer far quicker really, and it makes our job an awful lot easier. Of course, we are only human, so if we need to seek further clarification and we can't answer your questions straight away, we are better off going away, researching it further, and what we'll do is we'll create a frequently asked document after the event with answers to each question. Okay, so before we start, I have received emails from a number of you asking why you don't actually receive the email alerts with our specific business industry information on. Please do ensure that you signed up for these. It's a really easy process. The process that you need to do is to go to the main website, www.cityandguilds.com, scroll to the very bottom and where you will see the toolbar which is shown on screen at the moment. Click on the email updates, which is the bit that I've highlighted in the bottom right. Then follow the process essentially. If you don't think that you've ever registered, click on sign up to start with. If you think that you may have registered before, then click on update preferences and make sure that the business box is ticked. Of course, if you're looking after other areas as well, feel free to tick as many boxes as you wish. Okay, so let's take a look at the range of information available, how it's organised and where it's stored. Firstly, we have to establish a dedicated space on our website where you can find communications, guidance, updates and links to key information, including from our regulators as well. The Covid-19 web pages contain details around not just the mitigation process, but also updates on endpoint assessment, how to carry out remote invigilation. There are some free smart screen resources, specific information for the nations, for instance, please see the link in the middle of the page, which does show any nation-specific mitigation guidance. You'll also find on there a list of our qualifications and the primary mitigation approach approved for each qual. This could be one of 4 approaches, what we're going to go through in a minute. So calculate, adapt, delay or no mitigation. And we'll cover these approaches in a bit more detail later on. Our sector-specific guides go through each of the qualifications in the sector and the mitigation approach that will be provided. So that will be applied. So what we're going to do today is pull out our business skills sector guide and work from that. We've also produced guidance on determining centre assessment grades, otherwise known as CAGs, for our suite of VRQs. And again, these are located on our Covid-19 webpage. Okay, let's move on now to some information regarding assessment guidance. We have worked with regulators, SQA in Scotland, we've worked with Ofqual in England, QW in Wales, CCEA in Northern Ireland, to ensure really that the right mitigations and guidance are in place. Our main priority is to ensure as many learners as possible due to take their assessments or qualifications in this summer do receive a result, essentially so they can progress on to the next steps in their education or employment, or just in life. For each of our qualifications then, we've had to consider the best approach to take to mitigation. So there are 4 main approaches. The first one is the calculated results. We've proposed calculated results for qualifications where there's a primary purpose in progression to either further or HE, further or higher education. So learners will receive a calculated result for assessments that they were due to complete this academic year, where there's sufficient evidence available to form a valid judgment and where there's no health and safety or safeguarding issues, where calculated results will draw appropriately on a range of trusted evidence and will be based primarily on tutor judgments of what result each learner would most likely have achieved had they sat their assessments this summer. These will then be subject to quality assurance by City and Guilds. City and Guilds will also quality assure the judgments across different centres once they've been submitted. Where there are banked assessment results already achieved for learners, these will be used. So, with regard to adaptation, we've proposed adaptation for qualifications where their primary purpose is a mix of either progression to further or higher education or signifying competence, or where the primary purpose is to signify competence on its own. So a calculated result or a centre assessment grade is not possible, and then the adaptation route has been taken. Where learners are completing programs of study where the primary aim is linked directly to occupational or professional competence, or where the validity of the assessment will remain protected. So it does not conflict with identified health and safety or safeguarding issues. Adaptation will lend itself to the majority of the business skills portfolio, which we'll look at in a little bit. Delay. For some qualifications, assessments will need to be delayed where neither estimation nor adaptation is possible. This is very much based on the purpose and nature of the qualification itself. Qualifications such as license to practice qualifications or those qualifications considered high risk, for instance, those will all fall under the delay approach. You might find that some fall into the no mitigation category, and this is where no action is required, and centres can continue to deliver assessments or examinations as normal. Of course, if you feel that you want to delay at any time and you don't want to adapt or calculate, then that's absolutely fine as well. Okay, so which learners or candidates are in scope for these mitigations? Because it doesn't apply to everybody. Ofqual has published its decisions following the consultation on the Extraordinary Regulatory Framework at the ERF, which came into effect on Friday the 22nd of May. The aim is to provide sufficiently valid and reliable results to as many affected learners as possible. The framework means we can award results to candidates in scope based on one of the 4 agreed mitigation approaches. So the ERF is a temporary framework, we've got to remember that, and it does end on the 31st of July. These mitigation approaches are only available to learners who fall within scope and meet certain criteria. That criteria is where learners are incomplete, still registered as of 20th of March 2020, were scheduled to complete their qualification or assessment by 31st of July 2020, and have completed a learning programme that essentially addresses significant proportion of the content of the qualification that they're trying to achieve. For learners out of scope, unfortunately, it's a case of business as usual. It is a continue to offer a remote and blended learning where feasible. Okay, to help explain the mitigation approaches for our qualifications, we've organised these by sector. These specific documents aim to summarise each approach and then provide a list of what qualifications fall under which mitigation approach. You can click on the red link, which you can see on the slide deck, to view the sector guidance documents. They're also on our website if the slide deck link doesn't work. Let's look at some of the key dates for vocational and technical quals this summer. The submission deadlines to start with for those qualifications following calculated results approach to mitigation. Provisional centre assessment grades must be submitted by the 26th of June, which doesn't give us long, that's 2 weeks today. For those following an adaptation approach, claims must be submitted by the 30th of September. And for anybody that's been on any previous webinars, that date has actually changed and has been increased now to the 30th of September for adaptation only. As far as results are concerned, for functional skills, essential skills, all the approved results will be available on the 31st of July. For technicals at level 3, the results will be available. Results will be released. They'll be released to candidates from the 20th. Mathematics, sometimes known as core maths, the extended project qualifications, and level 3 VRQs. These results will be available on the 13th of August as well. Okay, let's look a little bit into more detail around the calculated grades approach. But first, let's look at a little bit of terminology first of all. Calculated grades are the confirmed grades that the candidates will receive once confirmed by City and Guilds. Centre assessment grades are the provisional grades that centres will submit to City and Guilds, so there is a difference there. Okay, the calculated grades approach is being used in a number of qualifications, such as functional skills, such as technicals, using and applying maths or core maths, extended project qualifications, essential skills in both Wales and Northern Ireland, ESOL, and a range really of other vocational technical qualifications. These are being supported by more detailed guidance documents discrete to each qual, describing the process in more depth. The centre guide to submitting centre assessment grades and declaration forms supports the submission process, so please make sure you do find that. In addition, the sector-specific guidance documents list out the qualifications in the sector and the mitigation approaches which should be applied. Some qualifications are also supported by detailed frequently asked questions as well. So centre assessment grades, CAGs, are submitted through a tool located within our walled garden. The centre guide actually walks you through that particular process. So if you are submitting centre assessment grades, you will need that particular document. The usual walled garden permissions apply there as well. So the deadline for submitting all centre assessed grades, like I said before, it's quite a short window now, is the 26th of June, which is 2 weeks today. What I want to do now is just look at the 6-step guide on centre assessment grades. So for the qualifications using the calculated grades approach, we're going to ask you to follow this step by step. The first step is about establishing who's in scope, which I mentioned previously, or who's eligible for the actual process. We've got to remember that it's those candidates who would have expected to take their assessments exams from the 20th of March to the 31st of July, so between that period, whose opportunity to take their assessment exam has been disrupted by the coronavirus, the COVID-19 situation. Step 2 then is a reminder that all those involved in the process may need to familiarise themselves or refresh the knowledge of the standards or subject criteria of the assessments they're making judgments against. In addition, the guidance they need to be familiar with to make sound assessment judgments. Step 3 is about gathering and reviewing valid or trusted evidence for each candidate, sometimes against a component or a qualification. Step 4 is the process of determining a centre assessment grade, so making that actual judgment, perhaps alone or even better with peers. Step 5 is about considering and conducting the relevant standardisation work to ensure the judgments and centre assessment grades being submitted are sound and consistent. And step 6 is about the sign-off, so it covers the sign-off and centre declaration process. So the submission process itself is clearly presented in the centre guide to submitting centre assessment grades, or CAGs. It covers how to use the tool within walled garden for that particular purpose. That tool will also have the functionality from today actually to allow download or upload of larger submissions. The specific guide also covers the centre declaration process as well, covering who's required to do this and what needs to be covered. Once complete, it needs to be submitted to estimation.quality@cityandguilds.com. This is a separate submission from the results submission on the walled garden. Okay, we'll want to start looking now at the main body of the slide deck. So let's look at the various methods of mitigation. Calculate first of all. So the qualifications shown in that screenshot here are all calculate. Now there has been some amendments in the last day, so this is why it's so important to keep on top of what version of the mitigation document we are using. So we're currently on version 1.2. So a recent update you might have noticed there is that the 8992 and the 8989 suites has now moved across to calculate. This slide shows some of the details really which are found in the assessment mitigation document. As I'm sure you can understand, decisions to have the ability to change, like I said before, they do change frequently. Okay, so on a daily basis they are changing. Hoping by now that should be it, but please do keep looking at the version control on our website. So just to reiterate, we are now on version 1.2 as of yesterday, as it was updated again. Calculated results then will draw appropriately on a range of trusted evidence and will be based primarily on tutor judgments of what result each learner would most likely have achieved if they'd actually sat that assessment this summer. So for more information there, I would get the mitigation document out and make sure you check up on your qualification that you're interested in. I want to take a look at adaptation now. So remember that we've proposed adaptation for qualifications where the primary purpose of all those quals is a mix really of either going progression to FE or progression to high HE, or where the qualification signifies say competence, or where the primary purpose is basically to signify competence, essentially. So at the calculated result, the centre assessment grade is not possible. Where it's not possible, you would adapt. Learners are completing programs of study where the primary aim is linked directly to occupational or professional competence. Where that's the case, adaptation has been used, or where the validity of the assessment will remain protected, or where it does not conflict with identified health and safety or safeguarding issues. So where what I've just mentioned there is appropriate, adaptation is the route that we're going to take. So the bulk of the business quals have fallen into this category. So for adaptation, we're recommending a slightly different step-by-step approach. Step 1 asks, again, you to identify the learners in scope, so that's clear, but also to consider any specific qualification criteria as well. Step 2 is about undertaking an audit of each learner. So you've got to identify the completed units and agree an assessment plan for the outstanding units, which within permitted arrangements. Step 3 is looking for assessments where an adaptation is permitted. Ensure that the assessor reviews all evidence and follows standard assessment processes, ensuring decisions are recorded clearly. And the key there really is that the decisions are recorded. Step 4 is clearly identify which units adaptation has been applied to, so you must let us know that. Where multiple options of assessment adaptation is available, you need to identify really which method's been taken. Step 5, complete the required declaration form, which must be subject to both internal quality assurance and external quality assurance. Step 6 is internal quality assurance procedures should be followed to agree final results and all associated records retained by the centre. And the final step, step 7, you must submit unit claims via walled garden by the new date of 30th of September. So all centres who wish to adapt need to complete the centre intention to apply adaptations to, that's a mouthful, isn't it? Centre intention to apply adaptations to assessment form to basically confirm the centre name, the centre number, the qualification name and the numbers, and then you've got to confirm where adapted assessments are being used. The form must be signed by the head of centre or someone who has permission to act on their behalf, and the form must be submitted by 31st of July. So that then goes to adaptation.quality@cityandguilds.com. So if you are going to adapt, you must inform us of your intention by the 31st of July. So the documentation that you need then to complete the adaptation process can be found right at the bottom of the mitigation page on the website. So do scroll right down at the bottom because it is at the very bottom. A centre declaration form for each learner needs to be completed. If they have had assessment adapted, so you need to complete that form for each learner. It doesn't need to be signed by the learner, but it does need to be signed by the assessor and the internal quality assurer within the centre. That then must be retained within your centre for 3 years, alongside all other assessment and IQA records. Your designated EQA will be sampling these as part of their EQA activity. So the second document is the adaptation spreadsheet. This needs to hold all the details of all the learners who have had assessments adapted. The head of centre will need to sign it, and this can take place electronically. This will need to be uploaded with your CA2 form to the quality portal for the EQA to select their sample upon their next activity, whenever that is. Where centres don't have direct claims, an EQA activity will need to take place before you can make those claims. So please contact the quality team there to get this arranged. The sooner the better. I appreciate that this might be a different message to previously received by the quality teams or your EQAs, but now the adaptation guidance is available, it's important that you do ensure that your EQA activities are arranged to enable you to make all the claims. All EQAs have received guidance on this over the last week or so are aware of the required processes to follow. If you do have direct claims, then you make your claims via the walled garden in exactly the same manner. Please be aware, though, that your EQAs will be sampling learners who've had assessment adaptations applied to them. So you need to be aware of that. Okay, moving on now to adaptations to business administration. Let's start with business administration suite of quals. For in-depth information about each qual, please refer to the mitigation document found on the website. Remember, we're using version 1.2 again, so if you've downloaded 1.1, please delete and re-download 1.2. As I mentioned previously, this is constantly changing, so please make sure you use the correct version. All units within the above, so 3473 right down to 5528 in that list, and all of the different routes are all fit for adaptation. Now, we'll look at the various methods of adaptation shortly and how you can adapt. I just wanted to show you specifically the table on the bottom on the right. You can see the assessment component numbers and that whether or not they are adapt or calculate. So the ruling from Ofqual is that they've insisted that if the qualification is competency based, all qualifications must be adapt. So a high percentage of qualifications within our business skills portfolio will be adapt. The exception is where there's an evolve test within a qualification, and then evolve tests would generally be calculated. Now, the guidance document outlines the mitigation for each qual. Let's take 4475. It's got two methods of assessment. So it's got both evolve or assignment based. So if you've completed, say, the majority of units via evolve, then yes, you can calculate. We've got to remember that the majority of evolve tests are calculate. However, there are some exceptions to that rule, specifically where other options might be available. So I used the example of 447 and how there are two methods. Essentially, you just got to refer to that mitigation document for further details. The business admin, there are many different routes. There's VRQs, NVQs, hybrids, etc. So please seek further information from that detailed mitigation document. The customer service is very much in the same boat. So all the customer service quals listed above, so from 2794 right down to 7014 in that list there, they're all fit for adaptation again. So an example is 5530 again. So 5530 has got evolve tests. These generally would be calculate for those specific units that are evolve tests, providing that providing the learners really already completed evolve units in the past, because essentially you're going to need something to calculate off. So you're going to need that evidence initially in order to make that judgment. So you've got to really have a significant amount of those evolve units completed in order to carry out the calculate of those evolve units. I'm sure you're no doubt aware, but for those running the 5530, there is the option also, again, of doing the evolve or the portfolio units. So if you've already completed, say, portfolio units, we'd recommend you continue to do that where possible, and vice versa. The contact center, employee rights, primary care and health management suite, that again is adaptation, and the guidance really is in the mitigation document again, so please seek that. Alongside the operational delivery qualifications suite and the financial services, these all fall within the adaptation method. Sales and marketing quals are also fit for adaptation. Just to reinforce really that the message that all qualifications are adapt unless there's an evolve test. and in that case, you need to make that decision of whether there's sufficient to go on to calculate. Of course, if you don't want to adapt and you just want to wait, that's absolutely fine as well. There's nothing forcing your hand to say that you must adapt. So what we're going to do now is look at what adaptation methods are allowed. So as part of the review really of outstanding evidence, assessors within the centres should make best use of existing evidence. It will be ideal there to capitalise on opportunities for holistic assessment. So it might mean going backwards a little bit, but essentially the assessor judgment needs to be robust. There can be reliable cross-referencing of previous evidence, for instance, as long as it complies with the individual unit aims. That's absolutely fine. Where there's been, say, an assessor observation, for example, across, say, another competency-based mandatory unit, then feel free to use an expert witness testimony to back that up. That would be a good form of adaptation. In these specific circumstances, the expert witness testimony might describe an event which is retrospective, really, as long as the event took place during the on programme of the learner within that registration period. That's absolutely fine to retrospectively go back and evidence something that happened. What I would say then is to add weight to that evidence. You might conduct, say, a new piece of evidence, say a professional discussion, as well as that would be worthwhile then to confirm the understanding and gives a little bit more weight to the evidence that you are submitting. So you need to justify that work submitted is the learner's work as well. So we need to make sure that it's authenticated. That authentication could come from supporting evidence. So it might be that you use a witness testimony or a professional discussion to make sure that they do understand once you've cross-referenced that evidence, and that would back that up nicely. We've got to remember, you see, that all the evidence submitted, which has been adapted, can be sampled by the EQA, so the appropriate authentication needs to be in place by the learner. Centre marked assignments. These can be taken remotely by candidates, providing the centre has the software or processes really that maintain the security of that assignment or that specific assessment material, generates evidence that can be retained by the centre and authenticates that the responses are the candidate's own, and that's the key, is the authentication. If it's not possible to carry out remote invigilation, it might be that the material might be compromised. We'd expect then that additional authenticity and understanding of that evidence is generated in a different way. So the knowledge assignments or knowledge tests can still be completed by learners, providing the centre has software or processes in place, again, that maintains that security of the assessment materials. The evidence can be retained and must be retained by the centre, but of course it must authenticate that the responses are the candidate's own. Where assessments have been completed after centres were closed, that's where centres must really exercise caution, really, that the evidence suggests, where the evidence might suggest, say, a change in performance, it might have gone up, for instance. This is where centres really need to be careful. In many cases, it's likely to reflect the circumstances and context in which the work was completed. Did they have extra support, for instance? Did they have access to extra materials? So we really need to be careful of that and authenticate any work that might have been impacted by that. Centres can assess candidates then, following on from that, via, say, oral questioning, which would confirm the full understanding of the learner. We really need to stress the importance of not sending questions to the learner, essentially because that might invalidate the security of that material, as the learner might possibly share easily to others if the question is actually sent to them. So rather than sending materials to learners, instead a Q&A could be used over a telephone, for instance, or it could be that you're using Skype. The learners, of course, can comment as well if you do use Skype or Microsoft Teams. They could write answers within there. Microsoft Teams and Skype can have a record function, for instance, so it can be authenticated by that. And of course, their evidence might be typed within the chat or the question functions of that said platform. So that would be a good way of authenticating answers and still keeps the assessment material validated. There's no security compromises. Tests content can also be used as a basis, provided the security of the assessment again is maintained. Where tests are multiple choice questions, the multiple choice questions could be rephrased into open questions, for instance. Where questions have got images or tables, these can either be shared discretely from the test, or you could source an alternative equivalent image, or the questions could be rephrased around the image, for instance. Oral questioning or question and answer sessions must be carried out by an assessor who, of course, is occupationally competent and in a way that authenticates the responses are the candidate's actual are their own. These will need to be recorded in written or verbal format and linked to the assessment criteria. Of course, standard IQA processes should remain in place, but they can be carried out remotely. That's absolutely fine. And of course, please remember that if these methods don't suit, the option of delay is still available should you wish to do so. Okay, before certification, all learners would generally need to have been observed by their assessor before they can be certified. In all cases, the expectation is that the assessment criteria should be referenced to evidence which has been assessed, and that performance evidence is used for competence assessment criteria. Where a small number assessment criteria don't have performance evidence as expected, then that's where the alternative methods would come in, such as Q&A, PD, etc., essentially to fill the gaps. Okay, what further support then is available? We are hosting other sector webinars as well. So after this, about 1 o'clock, this afternoon, is the automotive sector. We've then got a follow-up, of the hospitality and catering. I think that's touching on frequently asked questions. That will be on the 16th of June. ESOL, functional skills is then on the 17th of June, as the ESOL 1 will have passed. If you have interest in another sector, then please be aware that ones that have happened already will have been recorded, and so will be available to listen to. You just need to contact your relevant technical advisor. If you don't know who that is, come through to me and I'll point you in the right direction and give you the contact details of said sector specialist. Okay, appeals process is slightly different. So there's two different processes, one for calculated results and one for adapted assessments. For appeals for calculated results, where results have been calculated, appeals can be made on the grounds that City and Guilds did not use the correct information or follow the correct procedures. It's not possible to appeal the professional judgment of tutors or centres because obviously they're coming internally. There'll be no inquiry about results processes for calculated results. It's because City and Guilds have not marked or moderated any of the candidates' work or evidence for those assessment components. And if a centre is unhappy with the result, they can go straight to the appeal stage of the process. Appeals for adapted assessments, it's a standard appeals process for adapted assessments, so an appeal cannot be made for what's been adapted, but an appeal can be made about the final result. For further advice, we do appreciate that these are extremely challenging times, and we're keen to support you as best we can. on this particular slide, we've provided the details of those on hand to help, and a reminder of the COVID-19 support pages, where we hope you'll be able to find really all the information you require. If you've got any questions and you wish to ask, please feel free again to type into the question box, making sure that you start with the qualification number at the very beginning. Okay, speaking of Q&A, what we're going to do now is try and unpick some of your questions the best we can. As I said, we are only human, so where possible, we will do our very best. If we're unsure, we're actually better off going away and coming back to you later on to make sure that we actually get the right answer. Okay, so let's see if we can get some questions up here. Bear with me. Mandy, can you see any questions at all?
I'm done. I'm just trying to make it bigger, and then I can I'll go and answer a couple. The one around 552802 around the principal units. I think particularly on 5528, what we did a few years ago is we actually put the option of portfolio or evolve on the majority of units. So if you actually go into the handbook, you'll see one. So you could actually unit the portfolio or a witness test in it, try and look at them to see if there's any cross-referencing on any of the other units that have not been completed. And then obviously you'd have to cover the missing criteria with the learner. I think there was a very similar question on 4475, and I think Dom alluded to it a little bit earlier on. Again, if you look at 4475, you've got the options of evolve units or assignments in there. So if you've registered the learner on 447502, you should be able to go on the website and download the materials on there. Any problems on that, please contact customer support, but you should have both options available to you there. The other thing to look at is if the learner has completed any other units where there is an evolve qualification that you're looking at, obviously you could calculate that on that one as long as there's enough units completed to be able to justify the grading on that.
Noel had a question and I've lost it. My apologies, Noel. It was about, I think if I recall, Noel, it was about what does the centre need to retain as far as an EQA visit's concerned. They would need to retain all the adaptation assessments that's been carried out for that EQA activity. Yeah, what is held by the Centre for EQA Sampling? Everything, really. Will this webinar be available for teachers to view after today, and where will they be able to find it? Thanks, Karen. Yeah, the webinar is being recorded. The slide deck I can send out before the webinar, the recorded webinar that is. So I'll download everybody's email address and send out a copy of the slide deck first. The webinar does take some time to download from the GoToWebinar platform, but once it is downloaded, I believe, Mandy, are we putting it up a link on the website? Is that
for the recording?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So what will happen after today is obviously we're conscious that there is a very high volume of questions as we anticipated. So Dominic and I will be working through the questions because we're conscious we will not be able to answer them all today. We will then put together an FAQ and we'll be working on that early next week, and then that will go up on the website along with the recording. What we will also do is really send out a questionnaire after today to find out if it will be useful to have a follow-on Q&A, because, you know, we appreciate there's an awful lot of information to digest from today. You'll all want to go and have a look at the latest version of the guidance, look at the qualifications that you're delivering and the ones that, you know, are actually applicable in this instance. So it might be you may have further questions afterwards. So if that would be something that would be useful, we can look at perhaps delivering a Q&A session, perhaps either at the end of next week or early the following week.
Holly,
sorry, go on.
Holly has mentioned 3473, the Business Administration Diploma. Where the adaptation is to complete knowledge questions, can it be a mix of verbal and written, or should the assessment be all in one assessment method? There's nothing specifying that it has to be all in one assessment method. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mandy or Gary. It's about the quality really of the adaptation. So if you think you're going to get the best results from a mixture of verbal and written, I don't see a problem with that.
No, and I think again, it's just making sure that, you know, how you share them with the learners, and can they, you know, what you don't want is you to give them written questions and then them speak to the friend and, you know, give them the questions before. So I think it's, and the other thing what we're looking at is where you may want to do individual type questions, particularly if you're looking at an assignment that they'd submitted. We'd want you to check the authenticity of that. So it may be you do like a professional discussion or a Q&A session with each of the learners that have completed them. One, just to make sure it is their own work, but also to give them, you know, the opportunity to, you know, cover additional criteria that they may not have covered.
Thanks, Mandy. And Dominic, it's Gary Cole speaking. Just to confirm, absolutely, you may want to use a mix when you are already questioning or having a professional discussion around short answer questions, and you may find for some learners that you want to probe a bit deeper in some areas, and you may want to follow up and have that sort of supporting evidence that helps support your confidence in your decision when you're submitting a result to us of what you think they are. So just to agree with everything that Dominic and Mandy have said just now.
Thanks, Gary, that's really useful. There is a question about expert witness around, you know, what would we be looking for? I think actually what would be quite useful if you do have access, and if not, we can forward. We have actually recently put some information together about an expert witness for the customer service specialist dispensation, and I think if you use the rules that we put in there, that you know, for me would give confidence. Yes, it is somebody that's an expert witness in the workplace we'd be looking for, and somebody who's worked alongside that particular learner. Now, what we put in the guidance to the customer service specialist is worked with the learner for at least 3 months, but obviously it depends on the length of this programme. But it will be somebody who's observed that particular learner or apprentice, actually, you know, see them work and give confidence that they could do a statement around that, particularly where perhaps you've not had a chance to do an observation, so there's nothing else from an external source that you've got to validate that. So yeah, but if you've got any questions, or if there's certain, you know, you'd like to have more information around that, you've got a particular person in mind that you would like to do an expert witness, please do contact us and we can confirm that for you.
Darren talks about 3473 and the evolved tests within. So Unit 301 and 308 is evolved tests. Am I correct in determining these are adaptations? I can use a recorded oral structured Q&A session to complete those units. Yeah, I do believe that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Just looking through some now. Sorry, the GoToWebinar questions is really difficult to navigate. The writing is very small. Sapphire says qualification 4418, which is the business admin level 1. Could you please confirm what category this qualification falls under? To my understanding, I think it falls under adaptation. I would like to make sure. Gary, can you shed any light on the level 1? There was some issue with the majority falling under calculate, but then there was certain restrictions to that, wasn't there? Any otherwise?
That's correct. So that falls into the sort of the off-qual pot of a competence or primarily competence-based qualification. So calculation wouldn't be allowed.
That's right.
And so that is adaptation.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary.
There is a question there that came up. I just was looking at it just now, and I agree. The ability to look at the questions is quite difficult. Just while you're looking at some of the others, Dominic or Mandy, there was one about signatures.
Yes.
And signatures are a problem, and I just picked that up and I did bounce it back to a couple of teams while the webinar was ongoing. And just to confirm about signatures, I'm not completely sure what the context of the question was in terms of where it is. So I'll pick up 2 points on signatures. Number one, where you have to, where you are submitting a notification about adaptation to City and Guilds, there was originally a space for the candidate to sign, or for you to sign, as an assessor or someone at the centre. And we realised that that was going to be quite problematic, and so that was removed earlier this week. And the guide to adaptations that's on the City and Guilds website has been updated to say that electronic signatures can be used, and you do not have to print, sign and scan in that document when you are submitting notifications about adaptation to City and Guilds. So that's the first part. The second part, I wonder if, as I said, I'll be talking in general terms about if it's about logbooks or candidates signing something that they would normally sign if they were in person, if you were in college. Obviously that's not going to be possible now. So just to say, you are welcome to accept electronic signatures from candidates. You are welcome to accept email confirmations from candidates to say, this is my work and I'm confirming this. You are welcome to include a note in any of your documentation to say, you know, I spoke to the learner and I can confirm this is their work and I confirm this happened. And I'm now, you know, sort of formally signing this without actually signing it. I think we recognise that there may be lots of instances where a lot of the material that you would normally sign and keep may not be electronic, and it may be paper-based, and it may be held in centres and you may not have access to it. And obviously where you cannot safely go back to that centre yet, the college isn't open yet, and there's not much you can do. So you know, you can include a note or something to say when the college safely reopens, as it's COVID secure, with social distancing and all the rest of it, then I'll maybe, you know, go back and ensure that the paperwork is up to date when I'm retaining and looking through all my evidence. So hopefully that answers those questions.
Thanks, Gary. On the back of that, Susan says, why weren't centres given a choice if learners are okay to come into college now to actually sit the exams? I think that's very much out of our hands. Actually, that ruling came from Ofqual, and so we've got to obviously abide by that.
That is correct. Just in case, I mean, where Evolve exams, for example, for Evolve exams, where they can still safely, some colleges may be open and you can safely deliver Evolve exams. I'm not sure. I think I spoke to a couple of colleges earlier this week where that was happening. You can still do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no need, for example, if you have an Evolve exam and the mitigation is Adapt, which for business skills the majority are, though there are some calculate, for the adaptation you can proceed down that. But actually, if your college is open, and for example, rather than having 20 learners in a Evolve invigilated examination room, you're only allowed 2, and you want to bring in individual or single learners to do so, and you can do so, absolutely, as long as it's safe and you've got approval to do that. Tests should be live, they can still be booked, and the result would go into the system as per normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just, we have had quite a few questions around that, because I think, you know, certainly a lot of centres thought as withdrawing the remote option, for the evolve test that couldn't happen. But yes, if we've seen a lot of providers have gone back this week and have started to actually complete the tests. There is a question from Holly Brody around the 347303, and that's just really about clarifying once again about the knowledge units 301, 303. Can they be completed through verbal questionings? Verbal questions, absolutely. As we've said earlier, you know, that could be a variety of different assessments you use to cover them units, but yes.
Off the back of 3473 as well, Samaya says, the 3473 business administrator, do all centres have approval to, okay, it's an EPA question actually. Do all centres have approval to allow EPA knowledge tests to be taken from home? Does college have to ask for approval? They do have to ask for approval, yes, that's right. You must follow the protocol for remote invigilation for endpoint assessment, which can be found on, again, the Covid-19 webpage on the City and Guilds site. That gives you a full rundown of what you need to do in order to conduct that knowledge test remotely at home. It's not as straightforward as using, say, Skype, for instance. There's certain software platforms that you must use, so please do follow that guidance on our website for endpoint assessment knowledge test remote invigilation. There's a question from Maxine, 4428 5528 5530. We have learners who are due to complete by the 15th of August. Is it likely further time will be offered after the 31st of July? That's a tricky one, is that? If they're not due to finish before the 31st of July, then in theory it would be business as usual and mitigation wouldn't apply. Can you confirm that, Gary?
That's my understanding. It might be a little bit of a blurry area, unfortunately. But yes, if they are not being to complete before that July deadline, then it probably would fall into business as usual and would fall into that your earlier slide, Dominic, that you mentioned, where you know, you would try and complete as much distance or remote learning as possible.
Yeah.
And then complete assessments as per normal when things had returned to normal. And you may find that things do return to normal a bit sooner than July, and so you don't necessarily have to wait until too long to progress them as per normal. Yeah.
Conscious of time, there is another webinar after this one in a different sector. So last question. Lisa says, 5528 Business Admin Level 2. Could we claim for some students now and make a further claim for further students before 30th of September? I can't see why not. However, if it might be easier to claim all at the same time. That's obviously an internal decision. That's up to you. But there wouldn't be any pros or cons really behind it, I don't think. Would you agree, Mandy?
Yeah, I don't think there'd be, yeah, I mean, I think centres will do them in cohorts. So, but we can clarify, we'll make sure that that is in the FAQs. And we can clarify that just so that you have got the answer. And we will check about the dates as well, because we appreciate, you know, we have had centres saying that, you know, they are struggling for that date.
Yeah.
To be completed by.
Okay. It's just after 12 o'clock. So lastly, I just want to thank you all for joining us today on this mitigation webinar. We do appreciate that these are unprecedented times and extremely difficult for everybody. As I've mentioned previously, we will take all the questions offline and seek answers for them and then repost them back up with the recorded webinar version on our website for you to look at a later stage. Apologies that we didn't have a chance to answer all the questions, but I'm sure you can appreciate we are pushed for time. So one last thing, thank you very much again, and please stay safe. Thanks very much. Thanks, Mandy. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Tom.